Okay, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and a warm welcome to this final session of today. And I'm not only welcoming the audience here in the room, but also the people back home. Thank you so much also for joining us for this final session. My name is Charlotte Van Velthoven-Geerdink and I am a moderator at Charlie Speaks, and it is a great honor for me to be moderating this discussion. And the title of this session, I think, is very fitting. Does the EU provide the conditions we need for a strong and resilient European labour market? But before we start, we have some practicalities that we would like to share with you. First of all, as just mentioned, this session is being live streamed and will also be recorded in order for people to watch again, especially for those that have missed this opportunity, but also if you would like to see it once again. And it can be found on the IAB YouTube channel, but after the conference, more details will be known to you and made public to you to understand fully where to find it. Secondly, photos will also be taken during this session. I would like to repeat, and I know that you already signed up for it and registered for it at the beginning, but once again, if you would not like to feature in any of the pictures, do let us know and make yourselves known to the organization. And finally, a session of 2 hours is planned. That's quite a lot, but I think the good news is that we have ample of opportunity to also engage with you, the audience. I just attended a final session, also moderated by Christina Gathmann. I saw there were quite a lot of questions, so once again, just raise your hand, state your name, and we will be happy to take your questions and statements on board. Ladies and gentlemen, I know you had a very full day. You talked about AI, future of work, vocational education and training, mobility and migration, and we are going to discuss those topics also in this panel discussion. But perhaps it would be good to know each other a little bit better, also for me as a moderator to have a better understanding of the audience. So can you please raise your hand if you're working for one of the European institutions? Okay, good to see. Thank you. And please raise your hand if you work for a national employment agency. Okay. And finally, please raise your hand if you work for a research institute. Okay, that's interesting. But I think it's good to see that we have a broad mix of people that convene here together. And then finally, I think it would be good to see if there's a bit of energy still in the room. And I just have a very simple question to you. Would you be willing to actually talk to the people you are sitting next to during the drinks that we have organized for you afterwards? Because if you say no, we have a problem. Okay, good. I only see one hand that's actually being, okay, very good. Good. Yeah.
This question is a trap.
It's a trap. No, it's not a trap. It's a very straightforward question, but I think it's good that there's still enough energy. Good, dear audience. I already mentioned the title to you, but what is this session really all about? In an era marked by rapid technological developments and advancements, shifting demographics, but also global economic uncertainties, the resilience and strength of our labour markets are more crucial than ever. The discussion aims to explore both the national governments, but also the European Union's role in shaping these markets, examining whether policies, but also regulations and initiatives create an environment conducive to sustainable growth and employment, because that is exactly what we need in Europe. I would like to delve with you, as real experts, into this discussion about national labour market policies in Europe, but also the EU's impacts and identifying areas for potential improvements, because we have a certain status quo, and of course we would like to improve the status quo. We look forward to a very robust and fruitful conversation that will shed light on the future of work in Europe. But ladies and gentlemen, I cannot do this alone. I can also not just do that with you as an audience. And therefore we have invited a couple of experts to join me here on stage. And I'd like to call them out to join me here. First of all, ladies first. Janice Schmidt-Altmeyer from the Federal Employment Agency in Germany. Please give her a big hand. You've already met Christina Gathmann, but I'm just going to formally also call you out once again. Christina Gathmann from the Luxembourg Institute for Socio-Economic Research. Then it's my great pleasure to introduce Frank Siebern-Thomas from DG Employment. And finally also Ludovic Voet from ETUC. And now you might be wondering, what is that chair actually doing there, very empty? Well, I can promise you we will have another speaker joining us at about 6 p.m. I'll be introducing him then to you, but it's really good that we have this extra person to join the discussion. Good. So, does the EU really provide the conditions we need for a strong and resilient European labour market? I mean, we could make things very easy and you just answer with either yes or no, but we happen to have quite a lot of time. So I'd like to ask each and every one of you to make an opening statement which actually refers to this very question. And perhaps I'd like to start with Janice, what your take is on this.
Yes, thank you very much.
Could you please take the microphone? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me to this panel. It's a great honor to be here. And as a public employment service, of course, I think the EU provides a lot for the labor market and also do the public employment services all around Europe. I'm working for the German Public Employment Service, and it's actually the biggest public employment service in Europe. And we have different tasks we fulfill, of course, job cancelling, but also placement, job placement, reskilling, upskilling. We do labor market researches. That's why we have the IAB too. And we also connect with others in Europe with the public employment services. We heard from Caroline today that we're partner in the PASS network, the network of the public employment services in Europe. We're engaging very much in this network to bring Europe forward, to bring the European labor market forward, and to work together for a better labor market situation and to bring people into work. We also work with WAPES, that's the World Association of Public Employment Services. So I think not only Europe, but all over the world can do something. But a good network in Europe and the close work together with the European Union can bring us all forward. So I'm really looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for this opening statement. And indeed, you need people to do the work, and the same counts for you. And therefore, you engage actively in these kind of networks, which of course are very important also for exchanging best practices. But we come to that in a second as well. Christina, please.
Well, I'm a researcher, and I guess researchers are there to look deep and look hard. And so I tend to disagree. I would say I'm not so sure the EU actually provides the conditions for a resilient labor market. And I just want to, I think there are several points, but I want to open up one point which we already discussed during this day. Do we really understand what the digital transition and AI will do to the labor market? I think we already talked about, well, we see the beginning. We know that there's huge uncertainty what will come. But I'm also opening the question, are we prepared? And are we actually looking forward to embrace this transition? And there, I have some doubts because I hear a lot about, oh yeah, skilling is important, upskilling, reskilling, that's all important, digital skills, we need to train everybody. But do we really understand that the AI transition will not transform only some occupations and some skills within the occupation, that we need to change our business models, we need to change how management addresses skilling, how we need to think about skilling as a part of an enterprise model. We need to think about, how do we enable this? How do we encourage people to take risks, to embrace this change? And I hear a lot about, GDPR. I hear a lot about the Digital Act. I hear a lot about things that seem to be more like putting a brake on some of these developments. And maybe we need some brakes, but I don't see the counterpart that we also need to go forward and really embrace it. And so I would raise the point that I think there's more to be done. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks a lot. And I think what's quite a challenge right now is you said you're not sure if we're really fit right now, and that we have the right conditions, and at the same time really posing more questions to the main questions. Are we really ready? Are we prepared? How to embrace change? And of course, that's always a big challenge because people don't like change that much, right? They would like to keep things the way they are. But we enter into a more detailed discussion on that in a second as well. Christina, you also mentioned the digital transition. I know, Mr. Siebern, digital and green transition, that's part of your portfolio. So also happy to have your take.
Thank you very much. I think I'll try to place myself somewhere in between the two previous speakers. Obviously, I do have an institutional role. I'm head of unit for fair, green and digital transitions and research and digital employment. That's a unit which was set up 3 years ago, only at the time where the first Fit for 55 package was adopted. And our role is one to assess and address, let's say, the impacts that these transitions, the green transition and the digital transition, probably with a focus more on the green transition, do have in these fields. So it's recognized that they have quite far-reaching impacts which need to be addressed. At the same time, I have a background myself. During my studies, I can probably reveal it here, I did an internship at IAB. I didn't become a labor market researcher, but I continued, let's say, to work in the field of labor
They
market.
might have an open vacancy, not sure, but you might be able to apply again.
Labor market policy and labor market analysis. And our unit has the particular feature that we are also in charge of programming one research cluster of the Horizon Europe framework program, which is a research cluster on culture, creativity, and inclusive societies with a focus on socio-economic transformations. So I have sympathy for both fields and probably come back to this. Maybe just a short word, if I may, on the priorities as we see, which we try to address. I think the one is, as I said, addressing the challenges of the twin transition, taking into account the employment skills, social distribution impacts they have, and build them into policy making upfront to take them into account, because we cannot succeed the transition if people are not part of those and if those are not being addressed as part of the transition, while at the same time also bringing to the fore the opportunities of this transition, and make sure that these transitions are as inclusive and fair and leave no one, no place, no person behind. That's our commitment. There's the commitment and the priority to address, let's say, and to focus on people, skills, and sustainable competitiveness, empower people in this transition, and empower also industries and companies to contribute to the transition, while at the same time retaining and maintaining and improving their international competitiveness. This includes support to job transitions, helping workers to move to new tasks, new skills in the transition, to attract more people to the labor market, to tackle underrepresentation of certain groups, women, low-skilled, people with migrant backgrounds in key sectors of the transition, in the energy sector, for example. And the third priority I would like, and this is needed to ensure inclusive growth and sustainable competitiveness. And the third priority I would like to mention is the focus on quality jobs, quality job creation in the transition. This is something, the future of work must uphold the principles of the European social model, ensure fairness, and this is what new political guidelines and the mission letters of the commissioners refer to with the request to put in place a quality jobs roadmap. I think all of this can help, can strengthen labor market resilience, but probably resilience sounds sometimes a bit too reactive. It's not the only thing. We want to be proactive to shape transformations going forward. So we also, these priorities or these policies help to address new risks, be it heat stress, workers exposed to heat stress, be it people in the transitions exposed to lower job quality in the new job they may move to in the circular economy and parts of the green economy, like the OECD claims, or people exposed to increasing energy poverty or transport poverty, not being able to face higher skills. And I would conclude with a point that I think this also responds to the expectations of Europeans. We hold regular surveys, including the so-called Eurobarometer survey on what are the priorities for people. And the one conducted earlier this year, the first 4 places all relate to the field of social policy. So it's 45% of Europeans highlight the importance of ensuring good standard of living, access to quality healthcare, fair working conditions for workers, and equal access, opportunities and access to the labor market, well ahead of some of the other issues we often discuss. So I think as policymakers, we need to reply to this, and that's what we're trying to do. If we are successful, happy to discuss.
Okay, thank you. So I think that's a very clear statement as well, that you kind of need those framework conditions to be able to provide for those quality jobs that we need. And I also think it's very interesting that you pointed out we need funding programs as well, so Horizon Europe. But on top of that, people skills competition. I think that has all been very clearly stated, not only in the Draghi report, but also in the mission letter of the Commissioner designate. So let's see how things will be going, because of course we still have the hearings coming up very soon, and see if those components indeed will survive. Mr. Voet, happy also to have your answer to the question.
Well, thanks first for the invitation. And as a trade union representative, I will place myself more nearer to the assessment of Christina, maybe in between the one of Frank and of Christina. Well, let's be honest, the EU has made some progress in the last few years, but it's far from delivering what workers need, despite numerous initiatives that can, of course, change workers' life, like different directives that we have seen in the last few years, and we will maybe come back on it. They still need to be implemented, and workers still need to see the results of the policies discussed at EU level. But we see that there's a shift now on prioritizing competitiveness, market flexibility, rather than focusing on jobs, on securing jobs, and on social rights. So workers still face, and this is the reality, precarious contracts, stagnating wages, increasing inequalities, and also the fear of the transition effect on jobs. So in this regard, the European Pillar of Social Rights has been a breakthrough, and all the initiatives linked to the pillar were important to put in place. But for the moment, we still have, in a lot of fields of the European Pillar of Social Rights, general principles that do not translate into concrete actions. I would say that I see four maybe topics where we can for sure improve. First, it's the economic governance reform that was just adopted at the beginning of 2024 will bring back fiscal consolidation, so debt consolidation, deficit consolidation again on the top of the priorities in different member states. And this is not an environment that is really pro-investments, investing in the labor market for the needs of the future. So we have a lot of fears there that the austerity-driven interpretation of the economic governance reform would lead to a labor market less resilient than they could be, and that in fact different initiatives from the last years have also helped their resilience, like the SURE initiative, the Recovery and Resilience Fund, etc. Second, maybe linking the question, looking at platform work as one of the items. The EU level has led a lot the discussion on platform work with a specific directive, but we still are waiting the implementation by the member states. And there's a high risk that, technology advances rapidly, and that we're not, and it's important to put workers' rights and limitation to the development of technology. And for the moment, this is not yet the case in the different member states. So there's a need for ambitious action there also. AI, it's also the case, but there we still miss also the EU push on it. We are asking with the trade union, European Trade Union Confederation, to have a directive on the algorithm management in the world of work to really protect workers from the start, from the development of the algorithm, so that we do not confront investment in technologies and jobs. So that this would be my third point. And then fourth point, it's more the question of labor mobility that for the moment has been more we haven't assessed at all in the discussion on labor mobility, which is a freedom. We haven't assessed the question of brain drain and wage dumping, not sufficiently. So there, maybe the discussion, the right to stay, that is led by the report of Enrico Letta is also a hook to enter in this discussion, to really define strategies for territories to invest in the industrial transformation, in their public services, in the resilience of the labor market. So I see there are opportunities, but for the moment, labor mobility has more been a tool that has helped the employers in driving the competition between workers, and we need to rebalance this.
Okay, thank you for these very clear 4 points. And also good, we discussed Draghi. I've heard at least that Draghi report has been mentioned a couple of times, but also good that you mentioned Letta, because I think he has been very vocal also on labor, also bolstering the European Labour Authority and really balancing, economic prosperity and competition with social rights. So I'm sure that is music to your ears as well, Mr. Voet. But thanks once again for these very clear points. Well, then coming back to the main question, dear audience, I would say, yeah, we still have to improve those conditions. Not sure whether we are there. There's still a lot that can be done. I think, Janice, you already mentioned the PES network where you can learn from each other. And of course, you have a lot of experience from especially Germany. So how has Germany's experience with labour market regulations and reforms, such as the minimum wage or the short-time work scheme, really influenced your view on what conditions the EU should provide?
Okay, so maybe I start with the short-time work scheme. Yeah. And that was really something during the pandemic where the PES network could support a lot in Europe and where we could support each other within the European PES network, because Germany is very experienced with short-time work scheme. It helps in crisis situations to keep employees in their job, and it helps employers to keep them employed, because the German PES pays a substitute then to the wage. So even if there are difficult situations with the short-term work scheme, they have the opportunity to keep the people employed and not to dismiss them.
So you had the short-time work scheme already before COVID in different situations,
we had that already before COVID. Yeah. And during COVID, we had a great exchange with the PES network, because a lot of European countries didn't have such an experience on short-term work. And we exchanged, I think, daily in the beginning with the other PES. Online and video sessions on discussions. We invited employment agencies from Germany to join the discussions, trade unions from Germany to join the online discussions, to explain our colleagues all over Europe how we do that in Germany, how we secure work in Germany with the short-time work scheme, and how they can learn from us, and what to take into regard, and which obstacles there could be, and what possibilities there are also, because we also offer like skilling during short-term work. So there we had a great exchange, and I think that was one thing where we could really show that the PES network can have a great impact in crisis situations.
And that is exchange, but what really counts is then, of course, to see that other member states not just learn, but also implement it, of course. And that is something that you've seen happening?
Yes, actually we had, we viewed the steps forward from the different PES during the whole COVID period. And they also told us what steps they have taken, what they have implemented. I mean, of course, it's something you can't just implement overnight, but they took one step after the other. And so I think that was really helpful during the pandemic. It's a really practical thing where you can see how the network can work together.
And of course, you need to bear in mind the cultural and legislative differences, where things that might have worked in Germany, they were quite an obstacle to implement it in other countries. Could you also tell a little bit more about you as Germany already having implemented this short-time work scheme for many years? Did you manage to also collect data in a very good way, where you've seen from previous short-time work schemes, okay, that component works very well, but the other component, well, please skip it. I wouldn't implement it.
We've done a lot of research on that, but I'm not a researcher. That's the IAB. They did a lot of research. So maybe one of them can later elaborate a bit further on that. But of course, it has improved during the years. As I said, there's also a close collaboration, not only with the employers, but also with the trade unions, which is very important on that topic. And also when it comes to skilling during short-time work, that's a very important topic to keep people in the loop, to to give them something they can look forward to. They can learn something. They can improve their skills. So
how does that work, the skilling? They get like a training free of charge? Or?
Well, it's a training we offer together with the employer then. And if they want to do that, they can use that opportunity during short-term work. It depends on the sector, of course. It depends on the job you're doing, but it's an opportunity. And I know that some European PAS also took this opportunity to do this skilling as one element, for example, during this period. Yeah.
Exactly. So that's one example. Do you perhaps have another example?
Well, yes, I have another example, maybe something totally different. If I may go to the youth, which I think is something where really even the European Union did great steps forward in the last years. In Germany, we have a dual educational system, which we already heard before. And we also have in the past something it's called Youth Agency, and it's a one-stop government, which is really an approach where we try not to lose young people because they tend to get lost. Actually, I discovered this myself when I worked at an employment agency, that even if it's in the same building or if it's across the street, there's a social worker or somebody from the school, and they want to talk to the same young person, but they have to go over the street. Somehow they get lost. So we discovered one-stop government is really a good idea to have all in one hand, to keep them on track and to support them. And this is also something we exported actually to other PAS. We exchanged with many other PAS on this topic. And this is also something where the European Union introduced the Youth Guarantee, and it's got raised until 30, so not only 25. And I think that's very good because young people under 30, so until 29, they really need our support from the public employment services, from counselors, which can help them find the right education. And there's also in the Youth Guarantee the promise that they will be offered a job, an employment, an education, or a training within 4 months. And that is something that the PAS support very much. And we exchange very much on that topic because all PAS have other ideas around Europe. Modern ideas, we talked about AI before, some traditional ideas, I would say. So that's something we can really move forward on and we can exchange on.
Okay, thank you. And it's very important to make that point because if we don't support our youngsters, we have a loss of capacity, which we very much need, of course, to remain competitive. And I think Draghi has been very clear and vocal on this as well. Right now, the ratio is like 1 to 3, but very soon it will be 1 to 2, like one person really maintaining 2 people. I mean, there's a lot that needs to be done on that end as well. I think we have a question already from the audience, and I would like to take this one into account. And we have a microphone. Thanks a lot.
Since Ms. Schmidt-Altmeyer said that you have IAB for that, so let me second you on that.
Perfect,
as
thanks.
IAB director, and also play the role of Christina to put some water into the wine. So the training option, I very much welcomed that, but it was not used. I mean, we were able to quickly do online surveys with people, also with unemployed people on short-time work. It was a good idea, but it didn't work. It didn't hurt, but it didn't work. It was not used. What is also important, what you may not say, but I can say as a researcher, is short-time work stabilized the labor market. And because it was an existing institution, it did that very cheaply compared to all other countries. Our expenditure for Germans, the expenditure looked very high. Our finance minister can't sleep because of that. But compared to what other countries spent in 2020, we had a very efficient system. So that's important. This experience to be shared is important.
And do you know why the training didn't work? Why was this not taken into account?
Well, we saw Silke Anger presented that. Yeah. Training plummeted. I mean, the training providers were not able to provide the courses. Yeah. They were all set in person. and the move to online training, and also the willingness of the workers, if you're paralyzed in the firm, they wouldn't know what to train.
Exactly. So it didn't really meet the expectations.
So that was my theme in earlier discussions. It's very nice to have opportunities for training, but workers need also be made capable, be enabling of the workers to actually participate in the training and see that in their self-interest. That's a crucial issue.
Exactly. And perhaps also to get some recognition then for the training, so that it can help them again to find a fitting job and to be useful in that sense. Yeah. Okay, thanks for that. We stay with the research. Coming to Christina, I know you do a lot of research, which you like doing, with very important outcomes as well. What would you say are really the critical factors that the EU should address to create a more resilient labour market? If it's up to you.
Well, we probably would need more than 2 hours to discuss that, but I think I want to dwell on this point of are we ready for the AI revolution? Because, I honestly think we're not. So we already saw, and that's also in an earlier session, but also that's coming out of my research that, yes, AI is going to affect many more workers up the skill distribution. We know that. And we know that a good part of the change will occur not across occupations, but within occupations, that the whole task portfolio changes. And that, of course, makes it tricky to kind of think about how do we train, how do we encourage workers of not just saying, well, this is my job, there is some foreign thing called AI, this is creeping on my job, and that's often the narrative,
the negative connotation.
I don't want to deal with that. And, in 10 years, 15 years, I'm retiring and, keep it away. That's not going to be the attitude that will help us. And I think we need, and that's why I want to get back to this, we need kind of a change also how firms and how public administration, how everybody thinks about this. Because if we don't live as a role model, if we don't live this and make it clear to people, why should I learn this thing? Why should I,
But who could then be the role model?
Well, I think managers will play a very important role, entrepreneurs. And I don't think we are there yet to really embrace that. We are very much focusing, we need digital skills. Okay, we dump digital skills into our portfolio. But how do we actually transform the sort of also the mindset in the enterprises, in the administration to embrace it? And I think public administration is a very good example. And I think Germany, we've heard, is a kind of bad example because, digitalization in the public administration, you have to go looking. It's hard to find. And you wonder, if you want to push a transition, but you're not living up to that yourself, how are you going to convince people?
Yeah.
And I think that's
practice what you preach, for sure. That needs to be done. So that would be one critical factor to really look at AI, to incorporate it, to embrace it in a very positive way. Any other factors that you have encountered in your research where you think, okay, we really need to do and make more out of that to create this resilient labor market?
I think there are many more, but I think what the discussion we already had in the statements is we need both. Of course, we need competitiveness and we need to, have inclusive growth. However, my sense is a little bit where we are moving, and we talked about the challenge of demographic aging, where we are moving is that labor will become short. So we have too few people. So that means there's going to be a big pressure on also employers, how do we stay competitive if we have fewer people? And I think this, the Draghi report that we already referred to shows pretty clear that in the international comparison, Europe needs to do something because otherwise we have a problem. Not only via the US. I was in a panel just 10 days ago about China. China is a major force, not only in cheap products. It's becoming a world leader in science, in very high-tech stuff. It's doing some things we might not like, but it's also doing some things right, because I think it has understood how the AI transition works.
Yeah.
And it exploits that. And so I think, if we don't also think about the competitiveness part, then there's not going to be much of a pie that we can think about to have an inclusive growth.
Exactly.
So I think we need to think about, how do we increase the pie? And then we, of course, also need measures to make sure that people can participate.
Yeah, exactly.
And I can already see that I stirred some opposition, which is great.
That was the reason why I would like to give the floor to Ludovic, because he's writing down quite a lot of notes. I'm happy to learn also to have your take on what Christina just said.
Well, maybe we need a lively discussion. So I would question, I think, why do we always need the biggest pie? So that's all. The question, I think, for us is, what do we need to produce? What are the jobs that are needed to do that in order that we have a sustainable model? So when we look at competitiveness with the trade unions, we are always, yes, we can enter in the discussion on competitiveness, but looking at we cannot compete on China's term, we cannot compete on US term, not because we cannot compete, because I think we shouldn't want to compete on the same terms.
Yeah, and their terms are different as well. I mean, there's a lot of state aid and unfair competition because they actually pay into things where Europe is like, no, this needs to be tackled by companies themselves instead of like a huge backup in funding from those governments.
Yeah. Well, from our side, we don't have a taboo on state aid neither. The question is state aid for what? State aid to support which sectors? Sectors that have to be decarbonized. Yes, we need to decarbonize heavily intensive in energy industries like the the cement, the glass, the steel, the aluminium industries, and it's important to keep it also in Europe because it's jobs. So we see the need to support this decarbonization. But coming back on the question of AI, I think it's also it's always taken for granted that the introduction of AI is good. While it's a business decision, it's a managerial decision to integrate AI in the workplaces. In some cases, it can be good because it can for sure lower the pressure on workers. It can also improve the health and safety of workers. So no taboo on it.
We've just seen a presentation as well where an AI actually benefits instead of being a threat. Yeah.
But on some other cases, it can also increase the intensiveness of the jobs. It can also increase the health and safety issues. So what I think we should question is, it's first we need a framework that ensures that AI is never at the expense of workers' rights. And we don't need research for that because we need to put it because I often hear from policymakers, we need to know what are the effects of AI, or we need to know the effects of platform work before taking regulation on it. I don't need to wait the effect of dictatorship before knowing that I'm for democracy. So the point I want to bring is that if we have a basic principle and we want minimum floors of rights, we set them from the start, and this is how then it is they invest in AI in order that AI is always protected.
So you would say those standards are still not there. I mean, there's an AI Act, but that how to deal with this, how to incorporate this for the workers, that's actually non-existent.
Sure. So if you ask a worker, which worker in a company knows about how the algorithm management is put in place in its company? How does it affect the allocation of tasks in its company? So there's still a complete absence of democracy at work there. And this is what we need to put in place so that workers' representatives in the workplaces can discuss the investment in algorithm management in order that they see how it affects allocation of tasks, how it affects decision making, etc. Because in some cases, algorithm replace managers, and you need managers. So if it facilitates the work and the allocation of tasks, very good. If it's done without discrimination, very good. But we see that there are bias, in platform work on discrimination, on gender, on recognition, facial recognition, that are not addressed at all.
Yeah.
So we don't.
Which should not be the case, of course,
Exactly.
because the AI Act actually covers that we shall not do this social component.
Well, the impact on the
yeah.
world of work is overlooked in
Yeah.
the AI Act.
Okay. Would you agree that indeed AI is overlooked when it comes to the workforce, workers being really knowledgeable of what AI can do? If you can raise your hand where you think like we don't have a full or good understanding on how AI...
Let me give you...
Yeah, please.
So hi, I'm Marcel. Let me give you an example of a country where productivity growth measured appropriately is absent for the last 15 years. It's not Italy, it's Spain. It's the first country to have an AI Act in which, in collective bargaining, workers have a right to know the algorithm. So I'm not completely against it, but I'm very much... we talk a lot about inclusive growth, but we only talk about the inclusivity part. We don't talk about growth. We don't talk about how we can create and boost employment growth in Europe if we actually manage to contribute and generate IA. It's all defensive. I've listened to defensive attitudes, especially from the Commission today in the comments. It's all, we're only thinking about how to defend ourselves. We're not creating conditions under which European firms can actually participate, generate. If we want good jobs, you can't be just the final user of a technology. You need to have players there, right? So I could agree. We have a fabulous act on riders. So supposedly every platform worker, before it was the case in Europe, by default is a salaried worker rather than a platform worker. What's the effect? We killed the creation of platform work in Spain, and we still have excesses. It's a very bold way of regulating, and it actually prevents activities to arise that could provide very good employment opportunities for people at the fringes of the labor market. Let's try and exploit opportunities rather than continuously talking about threats. The entire discussion is only about me sitting there and IA is coming to attack.
Yeah.
And I fully agree, we need to balance things, and if there are excesses, we need to regulate. But regulation in Europe goes ahead of everything. And the IA Act is another example, right? Europe is not a player in IA, but it has the first stringent IA Act. They laugh at us in the US and China.
And that probably has to do with the fact that Europe is quite risk averse as a continent, as part of its culture. But you would say we need AI really more as an enabler, right? Instead of a showstopper.
IA is just an example.
Yeah.
I think we're missing the boat on virtually any technological revolution in Europe.
Okay.
And part of that is because we put a lot of emphasis on resilience. We put a lot of emphasis on not leaving anyone behind. How can you make that promise? I have heard this over and over again from the European Commission. You're going to leave people behind. You're going to leave millions of people behind. Technology is disruptive. Accept it. And then try, to help those and make those transitions. But here the focus is only on those who actually are suffering the disruptive part. And there's not a focus on the enormous job opportunities we could create if we manage to have firms that actually are leaders in the field. Yeah. And now I hate this reference to Draghi, but I guess that's also in the Draghi report. Yeah.
Thanks so much for your contribution. Perhaps I'd like to hand it over then to Mr. Siebern. Technological revolution, enabling that change. So what do you do in the EU employment policies to exactly kind of mobilize people to be able to find jobs and their part to play for competition in Europe?
A lot to be said, a lot of reactions, difficult question, but I maybe before coming back to that question, just to say the point of, I think we need to embrace these new technologies, these transitions, embrace digital, embrace AI was mentioned. I would even say embrace sustainability. But I'll come back to this in a second because I think a lot of issues come with it. What do we mean with sustainable prosperity, sustainable competitiveness? This is not competitiveness as of now today, but it's competitiveness in a time perspective and a comparative perspective. And we should not forget that the Green Deal, when it was launched 5 years ago, it was launched as a new growth model of the Commission. You could say a competitiveness model. And it took into account, and on the digital side, the approach is different. That's true because the two transitions are different. The Green Deal, the ambition of the Commission, the ambition of the EU is to be world leader in this. So this is considered to be the growth model, the growth path, the competitiveness path to follow. We have to showcase with our limited means that we can succeed this transition. And this should also help us building on the letter report, the single market. So let's not downplay the role we can play in the world. The European Union dares to put in place a new emissions trading scheme, which will have impacts on households, on people, on workers, on housing, on road transport, while at the same time putting a carbon border adjustment mechanism to avoid carbon leakage and to say those who import using lower standards have to pay for this. So there's some strategy, I believe, behind. Similarly, on the digital side, that's a technology-led transition, as you rightly say, which is not led by Europe. I'm not an expert in the field myself, but hence the idea to say how do we want to react to this, not to stifle competition or to destroy the technology or not to adapt it, but to ensure trust. And ensure trust or take the metaphor, leaving no one behind. Yes, you have to do a lot to make sure that people are being taken care of, sectors are being helped. But the idea would be the transition will not be better if you don't. And let's say the same goes, I think, for the digital transition. Yes, we are Europe. I'm going very far here, but Europe has to find its way between major competitors, the US and China. But we often discuss those, I feel, as if those didn't have problems. China has stopped publishing the youth unemployment rate because it's high. We saw today that China is aging faster than Europe. China, we saw next door at the launch event, China has the same problems with the labor supply and decreasing population and decreasing labor supply. The US probably has some issues too in terms of fiscal sustainability and in terms of polarization of society and democratic stability, which cannot be supportive to competition. So I think Europe at least tries to take a stance and tries to choose a model which takes along people and which says that we are at certain values, we are not willing to compromise, and which, to my reading, when I read the news, even those at the forefront of developing AI technologies agree that there are risks. Some of the main developers of AI have called to set up an international institution like one on nuclear proliferation to say, let's shape this together. So just to say there are risks which we need to take into account. Now it's a fine line maybe to say how to regulate, and if we have today focused on the employment effects, we are all from DG Employment. We're on those panels, I guess, and we feel that there may be issues which probably the current treaty does not really address or allow, because the definitions we are speaking about suddenly, mobility in the EU treaty is physical by definition. Now we move to a world of teleworking, digital cross-border work, AI tools. There are things which we may need to, I'm not a lawyer, but which may need some redefinitions in the treaties. So I try to make this plea, and I believe that the political guidelines of the new Commission have reconfirmed this focus on this sustainability transition, let's call it like this at large, as one of our main growth strategy and competition strategy, but it has also recognized that we need to pay more attention to industrial competitiveness in that transition, given that there's sluggish productivity growth and sluggish growth to make the pie bigger or to ensure that there is a pie to be redistributed. I think that's recognized. But this is not as a reaction against the other transitions, but to make it work together. And this is policy making in Europe, I believe. Without going into much detail, just to say that I think EU policies have had an impact, have stabilized, as was said before, labor markets. The SURE was mentioned, the short-time scheme, exchange of best practice, learning from those who have it in place was helpful. Not every member state had it. Not every member state allowed to cover all types of employees or even self-employed. So it was extended on purpose, and the figures look good. More than 40 million workers benefited from it, almost 3.5 million companies, close to 100 billion were given in loans to member states in need. And this, according to Eurofound, for example, has saved more than 26 million jobs in the EU. More than 50 million young people have, let's say, received youth guarantee, secured apprenticeships, trainings, or placements. We have a record high employment rate, 76% at the beginning of this year, 2 percentage points from our target. We also have seen that the green parts of the green economy have been seen to be more resilient during the crises we have lived through. We have to see whether this is something which stabilizes over time. But there are signs that those sectors can be more resilient compared to others. And we have seen a couple of major achievements. Ludovic referred to the European Pillar of Social Rights. There was an action plan with some 65 initiatives, some of which, almost all except one, I think, were passed in the current mandate. Some path breaking, like the Minimum Wage Directive. Maxime is coming in, so I have to refer to it. The Platform Workers Directive, Working Conditions, the Platform Economy, and others, which are seen, at least from our side, as major achievements. On the other hand,
thank you. Short interruption, if you don't mind. No. I'm just quickly going to announce Maxime Cerutti from Business Europe to join us. Please give him a big hand as well. Please,
let me make one last short plea.
Yeah,
also,
please.
The RRF was mentioned, or the European funds. I think those were also provided and had in the crisis. There were moments where it was unclear whether the ambitions of the sustainability transition could have been upheld. And Europe decided to focus on accelerating the transitions, ensure energy supply security, access to critical raw materials in a difficult period. And this, the additional funding went into supporting both transitions, the green and digital, but also social policy measures, reskilling and upskilling in particular under the Repower EU plan in reaction to the energy price crisis. This said, there are also weaknesses and shortcomings, yes. So
as with every policy.
As with every, we have seen, and here again I have to mention it probably, but there has been a decline of real wages until recently. This picture has changed. Not in all member states the levels are back. Collective bargaining coverage is below targets set in the minimum wage directive in many member states still. We have the big issue of skill and labor shortages, which was discussed today. Poverty levels have increased during the crisis, including energy poverty, despite massive support measures we have put in place. I already mentioned economic growth and sluggish productivity, obviously, which is a key issue. And last but not least, I would go back to the impact. All of this has an impact on polarization of our societies, which we need to address. And I would like to address one last comment, because I try to defend the EU and what the EU does and how we reacted. And we heard of good examples from the member states. If SURE could be implemented fast, it was because it was in the mission letter of the then president as a kind of reinsurance, unemployment reinsurance scheme. It was ready. Mm-hmm. It was ready to be used and transformed into a SURE, which was needed, obviously. At the same time, we see that this is a shared competence between the EU, between member states, social partners, many actors. And on some of these issues, coordination certainly can be improved to increase resilience going forward. And I'll probably leave it there.
Thank you so much. And that also shows you, of course, well, perhaps you said, okay, it's a shared competence. And if you want to do more, you need a treaty change, but that's not so easy to do, of course. But I think it's very good that you pointed out that there's actually a lot happening on the EU level. The green and digital transition, which actually has found an extra momentum before COVID. But as you already said, okay, we can see very slowly that we are benefiting in that sense, that actually people were better off working in those sectors. But of course, one needs political will and continuity, right? I mean, these were the past 5 years with the current Commission. But then we need to see in the next European Commission if we can keep it up. Because if we keep on changing policy, no one actually knows what they're up to. So that's going to be quite a challenge. Maxime, thank you so much for joining us. We covered quite a lot, but I think we collectively already decided that we have a nice question for you. So we have a general title, of course, that you've seen for the panel discussion. But I think one of the questions that we came up with is how to stay competitive with fewer people. How do businesses deal with that? So if you can just quickly do a short introduction of yourself and perhaps tap into that very point, if you will.
With pleasure, and thanks a lot for the invitation to address you. I'm sorry that I'm a bit late, but I did my best, and I'm happy that we still have a bit of time to exchange with the panelists. But
we just discussed short-time work scheme. I'm sure you were on a short-time work scheme, right? You can only manage part of the panel. But
yeah, no. So we are today on also the celebration of your creation. I think it's quite new, this initiative of having labor market research institutes put in coordination with ELMI, and so I think this is interesting, and of course connected with the PEST network and the public employment services, the work together that is done in that context. I think it can help in reinforcing the coordination and improving the way in which different member states' policies are going to be going in the right direction, in a positive direction to improve convergence, but of course in a context, and you asked me the question on competitiveness, I mean, we know, and I guess it was discussed, so I don't want to repeat what was already said on the diagnosis, but very clearly we are in a situation of aging which creates important impacts on the labor markets and on our ability to grow in view of the population dynamics. And I think we will need, if we want to maintain competitiveness from the labor markets perspective, at least to make sure that we're going to compensate for the exits of the growing cohorts of aging workforce. So this is the key figure. The key figure is to watch all those people who are living on retirement because they reach the age of retirement. And what we know now is that there are not enough young people to replace, because just in demographic sense, we have a gap between those who are leaving and those who are coming in. And so this gap, the question is, how can we address it in the best way? But I also want to reflect, and this is where we can gain in terms of competitiveness, that we need to improve productivity growth. And in order to improve productivity growth, we first need to understand and have the diagnosis. And there I think the Draghi report goes in the right direction, is a very helpful contribution. Why is it so that in Europe we've not been able to have productivity growth to the same extent as, for example, the US over the last years? And how can we improve the situation in view of our economic fabric and the way we are as European economies? And there, I think you probably have a relevant contribution to make. I also keep in mind that there are specific institutions on productivity, the productivity boards, which are created, I think, around 10 years ago, and which can provide also useful impetus in understanding what is really happening in different countries for productivity. The picture is, of course, that probably we are doing less well in terms of technological progress, the use of it in the workplace, and how this can improve the productivity of labor. It is also connected to skills. And of course, I think there is a lot that can be done. We, as Business Europe, are really trying to make progress and support the progress for the companies to reach out the 60% target that has been set for 2030 in terms of adults participating in training every year. This is a very ambitious one, and we said that very often to the Commission, that we are below 40% and we want to go to 60%. So, of course, 90% of the cost of training are borne by employers across Europe, which means that we already invest a lot in that. But for the next period, if we really want to make a difference and to have good results, we need more incentives to be put in place. And this is our core message to the Commission. ESF Plus, this very important structural fund that finances on social issues, needs to be mobilized. We want 50% of ESF Plus on skills. It's currently around 45. And we want to have 15% of employers support to be provided in incentives for skills provision by employers through ESF+. Which would mean, of course, significant resources to be put there. It's not to cover the whole of the cost, because I think it will be more than that, of course, but it is to cover the incentive function of having more investments to be put in place by the employers and the companies in the next years, and to do that in a way that is structured in view of what the companies need. And so, of course, that for ESF+, I think is an important area of work. The next programming period will be starting in 2028, so there is a bit of time to prepare. But if we want to reach the target, I think it is really time to work on it. And this will be a good part of the response to improve our competitiveness, and to do it with also a reducing population. But I think we will need to also compensate for the growing cohorts of those leaving. And that means the second pillar is about employment participation. We need to have a stronger focus on reducing inactivity rates. And of course, so far, I think the main employment target has been around this 78%. But is it the right approach in a context where the main objective is to reduce inactivity? And unemployment is not telling the full picture. So we need to have a stronger focus on inactivity in future, in order to reduce it and understand who are the people who are inactive, what kind of configurations they have as individuals, how can they be supported by employment services, public and private, to get nearer the labor markets, to start working, to work more hours progressively, and to be more stable in their professional lives. And that, I think, is a very important area for compensation of the reducing working age population, to have more people of the working age population participating in employment. And lastly, I want to also highlight another issue, which is more on the worker side. I think we also need to use incentives to motivate, as part of these efforts, to increase employment participation, to motivate those who are vulnerable, those who probably are facing difficulties to return or to get access to the labor markets, by creating more positive benefits to those who are actually managing to get to the labor markets, to put the benefit more in work benefits. And of course, this is something that needs to be calibrated so that it is complementary to the income coming from work. But as we are speaking about people with low work intensity, in many cases at the start, there is a need for public incentives also for these people, and to make sure that they are going to be encouraged and better off when they are working. And of course, all this means that we have a key role as social partners, and Ludovic is here, and we will need to work together also on the social dialogue and in the member states through the collective bargaining, because in order to achieve these results as social partners, we need to be at the table, we need to be working with a constructive spirit towards solutions.
Okay,
thank you.
Thanks a lot. So I hear skills very clearly, decreasing inactivity, increase employment participation, also reaching out to all the social partners there to work together. So thanks a lot for that. So productivity growth, I think, together with competitiveness, it has been mentioned a couple of times. So Ludovic, I would be happy to learn from you. Can productivity growth and social fairness actually go together, or are they at a tense relationship with each other?
Yeah, well, it depends the wage share of the productivity growth. So that's for sure the issue we have since decades in the discussion with employers of the importance, and I would link it with the discussion on demography. If there's less people, but that there's productivity, we cannot only speak about the fact that there would be less people. If there's an increase of productivity, it's part of the answer to the fact that there's less people working. Of course, it's not fully answering the question, because the question is also, for which jobs do we need the people? Is it at the same level of skills, etc.? So the skills dimension and the skills matching discussion enters into play. But it's important to have the discussion on increase of productivity, on how does it improve the fairness, the working conditions and living conditions of workers, and how does it answer to the difficulties in the labor market in terms of of unemployment, because what we also see is that there's a lot of focus on the jobs that employers cannot fill, the job vacancies, but there's way more unemployed people than job vacancies. So there's this focus. So the question is more on the matching.
Yeah, the mismatches there.
Then also the focus that comes from is often brought in the discussion also of attracting new third country national, which I think should not be the entry point of the discussion, because also of the political sensitivity of that discussion at EU level. On the question of skills, I think it's important also to ask the question on if workers have to be reskilled, it's for what job? So what will be the jobs of tomorrow? Workers cannot
Which is a difficult question to answer, right? Because we don't know what the jobs of tomorrow will be. And at the same time, we're making policy for something that might come or on the basis of the status quo.
Exactly, but it's possible to anticipate.
Yeah.
So it's not easy, but it's possible to anticipate. But for the moment, the framework that exists leaves a little bit the worker alone in telling him, look, in 10 years, the jobs will have changed. Maybe in 20 years, half of the jobs will have changed and even disappeared. They were like bleak prospect in studies a few years ago in this regard. And we see that, well, the jobs are changing, yes, but we can still recognize the type of jobs that exist. They are not completely different. The question is, how do we train the workers for this? And there we think there's also an employer's responsibility, which Maxime also of course said that employers are investing in skilling of workers, but for us, for sure, it's also an obligation that employers do it, because the introduction of AI, for example, in the workplace, lead to the skills obsolescence of the workers that are in these jobs. It didn't come by surprise. It's a choice, like I was saying at the beginning of the debate. Yep. It's a managerial choice to integrate AI in the workplace. So there's a responsibility of it. For sure, there can be support, and all companies are not equipped at the same level to support their workers. So for sure, public employment services are also part of the solution. But we need to look at for what type of jobs we want, which type of workers. And for this, we think that what is still missing at EU level is anticipation of change. Mm-hmm. Saying, yes, decarbonation objectives have massive impacts on the labor market.
So are there too little foresight studies then? Or is research, because we have a lot of research institutions here, too little included?
So there's the beginning of this foresight. It's beginning to happen, and I guess that Frank will also speak about the Just Transition Observatory, Fair Transition Observatory, that the Commission is launching, which is really a good initiative also to have in mind what will happen in the different industries. But what is crucial for trade unions to discuss with employers is what will be the jobs of tomorrow in each industry. It's not possible to be prescriptive on exactly how they are, but what are the trends for what do we have to train? Because knowing this in advance makes it way easier to speak with workers and to tell them, look, the jobs will change. We put in place the pathways for the job training that you need, rather than to tell you, you will be fired and you will have to find another job. Yeah. So, of course, there will also be job mobility. But when we can avoid it by anticipating, by putting the long-term perspective into the discussion of collective bargaining, this allows then to really build the competitive advantage of the company of tomorrow. Because a company in 10 years that will have trained its workers to be prepared for the digital and the green transformation will also be the company that will be the more competitive on the market, rather than the one that will be firing thousands of workers and then trying to find 1,000 of other workers that they will have to recruit.
Exactly. So you need this tailored approach also per sector to see what can we expect in terms of the jobs of the future, and what kind of approach would we like to implement then?
Yeah, we think we need the general framework at EU level that has the minimum rights needs in terms of legislation, and then, of course, enabling the sectors, enabling the countries to really define the future they want to be in.
Exactly. Thanks a lot. Perhaps also coming to Janice again. We talked like more high level of what can be done. I think you have a very good take on Germany as well. And I think a couple of times China was mentioned, US was mentioned, where we're kind of losing out on some sectors. I think Germany, and specifically the automotive industry, was quite a lot in the news lately. Perhaps you can reflect, it doesn't have to be that example, but if you can reflect, okay, how can we ensure that we're not losing like one of the key components of our European competitiveness, which honestly has also been the automotive industry in Germany. What do you see happening?
Well, yeah, I saw the pictures in the Draghi report about the comparison between Germany, the US, and China, also the automotive industry, of course, and how we stick to automotive industry in Europe and Germany especially. We are having a transition there too, of course, and we're having a transition in the automotive industry, for example, when it comes to e-cars, how to reskill workers from traditional automotive industry to the future of the automotive industry. And actually, we have an example there in Lower Saxony where we have a lot of automotive industry too, also in Bavaria and Baden-Württemberg. And there we have a lot of roundtables. The employment agency together with the trade unions, together with employers associations, because it's very important to have a good social dialogue there. And it's not so easy as one would think to go to employees and say, oh, okay, we're changing the industry here. You have to reskill, no problem. This is your training course.
This is what you've done forever, and now you have to change. Exactly. Yeah.
It's very difficult, not only in the automotive industry, also in the coal phase out. But you have to convince them. And we discovered that it's not only a social dialogue, but it's also the employees you need. And the best experiences we had is actually to find one employee who did a training and who went through a transformation and who learned what the skills are that are needed, and who's going back to all the other workers and tells the story.
So that's a kind of an ambassador function. Yes. But honestly, you could also say there's a lot of burden being put quite late on the employee, where actually the employer should have seen, we're talking about foresight, already seen coming, okay, we need to do something. We really need to focus on this digital transition. But honestly, it's too little too late.
It's not so, it's not so easy.
I'm being very black and white right now. But
well, we discussed this a lot also with the public employment services among Europe, because it's not only in Germany a problem which we're facing, it's a challenge all public employment services have, depending on the stage they are at. And we talked a lot about digitization today, and of course, we have some European countries which are more digitized than Germany. I mean, we already heard that we're having some homework to do there. But the Baltics, for example, they're much more digitized. So we try as public employment services to learn from them, to learn how they deal with it, how they deal with transition. And when it comes to green transition, to bring another example, we had, for example, in the PASS network, a working group where we exchanged on green transition and green jobs. What are green jobs? And we exchanged with the trade unions there and with the employer associations, because it's a very difficult topic to foresee in the future for all the different countries in Europe. What are green jobs and what is the definition of it? Because it's also very difficult among Europe. And
because on the one hand, the transitions go very fast, but at the same time, when there's political uncertainty, you don't really know how fast it's going.
Depending on the situation you have in the different member states. And
or even at the regional level in some countries as well.
Like, as I said, the coal phase out, where we have these round tables to, there we don't have an upskilling, there we have actually a reskilling, because we need people to go into other professions. and to change profession, because if we have a coal phase out, they will not be able to work there anymore. So there, we work closely with our partners together from employers and trade unions, and also using universities, startups to find ideas where people can transform to and where people can move to work in the future, because it's not that easy. You know, you can't just say, okay, this is a similar job, just go there and you have 2 hours, 2 weeks of training and it's all easy. It's not that easy, because it has to be maybe something in the region where the people can work. Maybe it's going to be a totally different field, but it's a good idea from a startup that comes where people can work in some profession. So it's a discussion we all have to face in the future. And plus, conditions are also where the member states are when it comes to modernization. For example, in Germany, as you mentioned, how is Germany doing in comparison? We realized that we have to modernize there. So German government is currently working on a modernization of the unemployment security system benefits, for example, to be more resilient for the future. But that's something we're working on. And I think all the topics we're working on in the PES network, we're working on the needs too. As we talked about the people who are far away from the labor market, who are unemployed, but maybe they're not reached, and maybe we have to find better ways to reach out to them, to activate them for the labor market. Older people, people with disabilities.
The untapped potential.
Yes, the untapped potential, how to reach them, what are good ways. We have a stakeholder conference on that on the PES network in November coming up.
You can do a bit of promotion, that's fine. Yeah. Which date?
So we try to really find together good solutions, how to deal with that, because we have similar challenges in Europe, in the European PES, and still, we do have different conditions in the member states and different conditions when it comes to digitization, when it comes to working together with trade unions, with employer associations. But I believe that we can manage it better together with an exchange than to think about it yourself. And I mean, even if we look at the comparison with the US and China, I think it's something we can look at together and think about how we can go forward together to be more attractive and go forward in the market there.
Exactly, and that's something unique, of course, in Europe, that you have this cross-country collaboration that you can enable. Thank you for that. Coming to Christina, and again a bit on the topic of change, right? Are people willing to change? And we have vulnerable groups that we would like to see being more mobilized to work, for example. There might be discrepancies between the low-skilled people and the high-skilled people. How do we deal with all those challenges? And how can we really ensure that we can find every person possible that is not just only told to work, but really willing to work and make this active contribution? Because we've learned already we need this full workforce. We need this productivity growth, which means being more efficient in what we do, but surely also to have every person capable of working to really work. So what does your research tell you?
Well, I mean, that's a big question.
I know.
And, I mean, they're very diverse groups, but maybe let me pick one or two examples, and that's
please.
going to be in the highly contentious field of migration.
Yeah.
So, you know, if you look at migration, and I think that's actually where sometimes the regulation or the laws are quite restrictive. So if you look at, for example, employment rates of immigrants, and in particular women, female immigrants, their employment rates are often extremely low. And this has to do with, you know, maybe traditional that the employment rates are not very high, but it also has to do that very often as a non-EU national, if you come and you bring a partner, and that's often a man coming and then bringing his partner,
family.
They don't get a work permit. And it's actually not so easy to get a work permit. And if you want to move, let's say if you work in Luxembourg and you want to move to France, you can't, because then you have to get a residence permit for France as a non-EU national. So there are all kinds of barriers. And we know that often, you know, if you have high-skilled immigration from outside the EU, you know, India is the most recent example. often the partners are also high skilled, and that's a potential we are not using in many countries. I'm not saying in all of them, but similar for international students. Not all countries have good ways of making the transition from finishing a degree in the respective country to the labor market easy. You have to change visa. You can only look. So in Luxembourg, for example, you have a visa to look for a job, but once you have the job, you have to apply for another visa to actually be able to work, and that takes, depending on the time, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, maybe longer. So I'm saying I think there are barriers that we are kind of having that I think is worth thinking about in addition to all the other groups which we already touched upon.
Aren't those barriers also fed by the media, basically putting migrants into one box as to low-skilled, they're just going to do crime as soon as they arrive in Europe instead of looking at all the potential? I think that's one of the remarks that was made by the audience as well. We don't want to take the risk. We first want to control everything. That's going to take a long time, and then we might enable. Isn't that one of the problems?
I fully agree. I think the public discussion about migration is a very odd one. Especially because the single market, one of the main achievements is that you have intra-EU mobility, and hence you have EU migrants. Yeah. And somehow there's huge mobility. If you go to how many Polish people work in Germany, how many German, French, Belgians work in Luxembourg, and vice versa.
Yeah, and we have the Professional Qualifications Directive providing that framework. Yeah,
there are many hundred thousands of international students coming. There's a lot of IT specialists coming, and of course, this is a very different type of migration than the migration that's often the media focus on, but then everybody is put in one box. Yeah. And I think that's the first big problem, that we're putting this all in one box. And I think one of the reasons, or maybe one of the sources, is that in Europe we are not very good in thinking about migration as a strategic policy instrument. So migration is somehow, either we don't want to be selective, like Canada or others, or we don't want to kind of deal with that. And I think that's the root of the whole problem, that we are not honest about also the migration we also want to encourage, and what we want to maybe also, how we can help the people that come to also integrate better, faster, also through skilling. I think that's a super important one, because often, of course, the degrees, credentials are not fitting for our labor markets. But I think we need to be more honest in the debate.
Thanks a lot for that. Perhaps, Maxime, what is your take on that? Because surely a better approach to migration, more strategic policy thinking on the topic, can enhance productivity growth as well.
Definitely. So, what is in discussion now, I will reflect a bit more on some of the prior points. One is the role of skills intelligence on our labor markets. Mm-hmm. It was discussed. Can we make it? Are we able to anticipate the jobs, their evolution, and what kind of skills? I think if there is a generation that can take up the challenge, it's ours. We have the tools, we have the technology, we are much better at using data. And I think there is already a lot that is being done. For example, in CDFOP, they do this Skills of 8 project, which is already looking quite granular into different types of skills and different types of jobs and their evolutions. And of course, this is a starting point. But I think if you complement this with what the public employment services do, which is a lot of data on where the people are and who are these people and how does it connect to the employers in different regions, in the national context. If we're better able to combine these different data sets that are created by different actors and to cooperate on that, I think it would really benefit. I also see the role of the private employment services in this, and the cooperation between the public and the private employment services is crucial. Because we will need all the efforts to converge in the same direction to have more people coming to the labor markets. And so that's one aspect. The other is, of course, Draghi also commented on this in the report, and there is this notion that we need to invest better in the skills intelligence going forward. So I think now it's about how to do it, and on this, of course, the Commission will have an important role in trying to frame it in a way that is a coherent policy with the role of different actors. And that leads me to one particular process, which is essential, which is this EU action plan on labor and skill shortages, where the key actors are well known. It's member states and social partners. And we need the Commission and the member states, and this is done through the EMCO. So you know that, of course, it's the technical body in EBSCO Council that is working with member states on employment policies. EMCO needs to be proactive in creating space for tripartite discussions. We need to have better information about what different member states do. And we need to be able to relate on a tripartite basis on what works and try to nurture different countries' policy approaches towards the best functioning approaches. It's about digital to an extent, but it is on many issues, attracting specific groups, setting the benefits in the right way in cooperation with Social Protection Committee. So there is a lot to discuss, but we are really willing to participate in that. And then migration.
Yeah.
On migration, just to say that, I didn't start with this because I think we need to look into employment first. And this is
at the broader perspective instead of like looking just at the migrants.
There is a lot to do on that. And so, I also hear what Ludovic is saying. And we need to have a fact-based debate on migration. And I think what you've been saying is honest. So there is a lot better that can be achieved through a migration policy. We also know the political context in which we are. So it's expected when you look at what is happening in the portfolio that there will be a stronger approach, a tougher approach against irregular migration. And that, of course, is going to be part of the policy in the next years. But on the labor market side, I think, and this is our main focus, there is room and the commitment is there, I think, in the Commission and also in the European Parliament to make this talent pool work and fly. And that, for us as social partners, is crucial to get it right. So we will work on that and we'll make sure that the talent pool is going to be designed in a way that is connected to labor market needs, where we have a good idea of shortage occupations where they are, again, using the technology. And that it's going to be part of good labor market approach, which, of course, connects to what we do with the people who are in the countries. So it has to be seen in view of the labor market situation overall. But migration clearly has a role to play because we don't have enough people. And so we will need to target better.
Exactly. But there you really go against the current trend, I would say, with more and more EU member states filing, there is an asylum crisis, so I need an opt-out on the general EU rules that are applicable to us. But you could actually say there's a reverse kind of crisis, and the crisis is namely that we have this huge potential with migrants that we simply do not grab and use to our full benefit in Europe.
And for example, I think there are other legal channels for legal migration to Europe. We are speaking here about talent pool. There was a big focus in the previous term on the blue card, and this has been adapted. But there is another set of legislation which is at European level on family reunification. And I think looking into this could help addressing some of the issues that you're mentioning. Why is it that there is such a gap between men and women of migrant origin in participating in employment? Is it linked to the national policies, access to work? That is something we need to explore. But when you look at this directive on family reunification, there is almost nothing on labor market. So you also need to make sure that in the legislation, there is a stronger focus on attracting these people to the labor market.
Exactly. That would be as well for the EU as for the EU member states, of course, to focus on. Ludovic, would you like to comment on the topic of migration from the trade union perspective?
Yeah, sure. So for years, we were saying that it was important to have an approach on migration where migrants arriving here would have the same rights as other workers. Because for the moment, it's also the dumping between the conditions that makes profitable, the fact that workers that are here in irregular situation, but are working, most of them, were interesting to by abusive to be employed by abusive employers. So here we need the legal pathways that makes that if migrants arrive in the EU, they are employed at the same on the same conditions. But I have difficulty to see with the approach on high-skilled workers how it would not be a brain drain approach also, because we see with the talent pool discussion the need for having workers in the health sector with a lot of need in the coming decade in a lot of countries to replace workers that have left the health sector because of good reasons, because of the difficulties in these sectors, because of the fact that they are in a lot of cases under hard pressure, not well paid, etc. So we're leaving the profession for good reasons, and the improvement of working conditions in these sectors has not been the first driver for policymakers. And in this context, attracting people coming from Morocco, coming from Tunisia, or from other countries, where of course the health system also needs them, how could it be something else than brain drain? So I think that there we have to be cautious about not thinking only about Europe.
So what would be your suggestion if people, for example, the example that you use is Morocco, for example. One could say, okay, why would those people want to come to Europe? Because they live in a safe country. They can be used very well within their own healthcare sector. So what would your suggestion then be? Bring them back?
They also need improvement of their working conditions in their countries. So that's for sure. Trade unions there also fight for this.
Exactly.
But I think the big issue is also that there's a pool of irregular migrants in the EU, and they will not go back. So all the dreams of the far right of sending them back, this is impossible, and this would be also in terms of they are contributing here, they are working in a lot of countries here, their child are in schools here, are integrated in the neighborhoods, etc. So and there's a lot of untapped potential of the irregular migrants that are already here. So yes, first on employment policies, let's look at those who are inactive in the labor market. Then look also at those who are not officially in the labor market, but they're also about migrant workers, we have to also speak about the real problems of their integration in the labor market. And I didn't heard about discrimination in the access in the labor market, discrimination in recruitment processes, also by abusive employers there. So if we don't tackle this issue, we have a wrong diagnosis of why migrants are less in the labor markets. Another challenge also is, of course, the access to kindergarten. Why in a lot of cases it's so expensive. I'm not in a difficult economic situation, but I have a young son of 7 months, and I see completely why in a family someone would not work, because having to put his child in the crèche. When you look at the differences, you see concretely that for people that are at the level of minimum wage, for sure, it's interesting to stop working. It's not the incentive to work. It's not sufficient with the cost of crèche. So that's where then we can have different approach. Right-wing policies will put more the pressure on lowering the rights of those who are unemployed. Yeah. I'm not on that side. But what we can do is improve the access to crèche by having more place, for sure, but also speaking about the cost.
Yeah.
So if
and in that sense, you can already put the women and the men at work that don't have work right now, and make sure that they also work in the kindergarten, in the crèche, so that everyone can pay their contribution.
And the last issue, I think, is language. Yeah. We have seen, because we were a lot integration of course, in the labor market depend on the knowledge of the language in the country where you are. But we also saw that it was not an issue for people that were only coming from outside of Europe. when we had of course, the launch of the war against Ukraine and the fact that we welcome Ukrainian refugees, it was exactly the same challenge for Ukrainian refugees. Yeah. So here we need well-equipped public services, education systems, not under austerity cuts in the near future, that invest in helping those workers integrating the labor market, and their languages is the key issue. And also not only languages, but putting them in the system of supporting them as soon as they arrive.
Exactly.
If you lose 1 year, of course, they are outside of the labor market.
Yeah, but honestly, also technology has made huge advancements for people to learn a language in a very rapid way. So I think that's also, as you mentioned before, Christina, are we willing to adapt? Are we willing to make that change and also put in our own efforts? So thanks for that. Before we go ahead, I'm just looking around to see if there is a question. Yeah, do we still have the microphone? First question over here, and then the second one up front.
First, a provocative comment, and then the question. So you asked questions at the start. I think one interesting question would have been, how many people in the room have read the Draghi report? And to be honest, we need this periodic reminder about things that need to change in Europe. But many of those lessons are well known. And maybe people in Brussels are surprised, but I guess at this side of the room, not so much. 12 years ago, there was a plan to have a European MIT, right? We needed this huge player in the research field. What was the European response? No. You need to share research funding across Europe, so we got ERC. It's good. I mean, it's competitive. It has attracted top researchers, but we didn't find a solution to compete with US universities. The same is going to happen when we talk about telecommunications. Countries are not going to be willing to give up their national champions. In energy, it's going to be the same. And Europe is going to try not to anger anyone, right? So I'm skeptical there. But I had a practical question. During the pandemic, Spain was one of the countries that had no experience except with 800 workers with short-time work schemes. And so the government was involved with lots of interaction at the European level, and in the background, many research institutions helped out, and we did as well. And so in the discussions, the German representatives told us something that we found interesting. Apart from ERTES, as they call it in Spain, or short-time work schemes, acting as a stabilizer in recessions, there was also a discussion on using short-time work schemes as a way to permit that certain sectors in trouble, like the automotive industry, could temporarily reduce hours and then have a massive reskilling of the workforce. For instance, to move to electrical vehicles. So now the surprising thing is Spain came out of the labor market, out of the pandemic, and it's already written in the law. So we have a mechanism whereby the government can mobilize a short-time work scheme. Firms are then obliged to train. It's not an option. There have to be training plans. Does this exist now in Germany, or are you still debating?
You mean the training as an obligation, or?
No, a short-time work scheme that is not meant to address temporal reductions in demand, but a sector, forgive me, Bernd would probably use the same expression, a sector in decline, German automotive industry. And so if there is, the Spanish government would have an instrument to then call an ERTE, provide relatively generous support, and the idea would be that during a 2-year period, the firms in that sector could prepare themselves to compete on the market with Chinese.
So in short, has Germany learned from Spain?
No, in fact, Germany was debating this.
Yeah.
And so we took this on, we transformed this into a proposal, and they passed it into the law.
And you actually implemented it, in
exactly.
law. Okay.
So maybe badly.
Yeah, maybe.
Perhaps Janice, you would like to...
Well, he's taking up the
Okay, perfect,
Give him the floor first.
Absolutely fine.
The answer is no.
You're still discussing.
No, we went back to the scheme before, after having too long the extensions, COVID-related. Then there was the energy crisis, supply chain problems. There were always good reasons to extend the generous short-time work implemented to COVID, but the usage declined. But it was not transformed as in Spain. But on the other hand, maybe there was no need because in principle, policies are available to support firms.
But this is a sector-wide idea, right? It's not an individual firm. So it's a sectoral program, and it comes with strengthened support. So it's much more generous than in the case of Spain. So the idea is...
Yeah, we went back to the old scheme, which is not generous, which people believe, researchers have advocated that there is an equal sharing of the burden between the worker, the firm, and the employment agency to align the incentives. But there are policies to... And Janice Schmidt-Altmeyer mentioned that to support transitions, but they also involve other government action, partly, but the matching of the workers. Can I also ask my question?
In a second, because I think Ludovic wanted to comment on this, right? So I give him the floor first.
Shortly, because I think that this example, at one point, Spain and Italy brought that discussion at the council level on having a kind of SURE 2.0 that would finance efforts in upskilling and reskilling, which was then dismissed, this idea. And I think that there we missed an opportunity because maybe SURE, as it was, is not exactly the perfect tool. For sure, we can discuss this. But we missed an opportunity. But what is missing, so I would support that, that policy, but what it's missing behind is that at the beginning, I think you explained why in Germany that in Germany it didn't work. That during the pandemic, people could take the lessons to reskill or to upskill. Why? Because in fact, during the pandemic, there was no clearness on for what would I retrain, for what job, how will my job change during the pandemic. So for sure, there was no appetite on looking at to what will I train. But with the green transition, with the digital transition, if we look at anticipating this change, we see that it's possible to have in mind where we are going. So in this regard, we don't have the policy, but this was an idea that could fit for the saying, yes, when people are in the transition, and when I see in Belgium we have a social safety net that can allow this, but when I see that in Audi here, 5 kilometers from here, there will be 3,000 people that will lose their jobs because of the choice of Volkswagen. It will happen also for 2 plants in Volkswagen, etc. I would like to avoid that, but that's another question. But for the skills part of it, we need a scheme at least at EU level that would make sure that in all countries, when this happens, people can be retrained in advance of the jobs disappearing. That's the point.
I'm not sure about the EU level. So I think one of the words that is missing in Brussels a lot is subsidiarity. Brussels is very far away from the economic reality.
Do it at the lowest level as possible.
Yeah, this is the country's responsibility. Now, we may have a reinsurance scheme. So there may be ways in which Brussels or Europe can provide loans like the SURE program to countries that cannot implement this. But this is not the task of Europe. These kind of schemes themselves.
Could you please use the microphone also for the audience back home? Thanks.
Yeah. So I think part of what I notice in the discussions here is Europe and the European Commission is talking about a lot of policy domains that I think in the past were considered to be national responsibilities. And I think we have lost a necessary debate is which responsibility should Europe take on and where should responsibilities be laid at the national level. I think that is also where we need to rebalance.
Okay, thanks for that. And
the example of SURE is the perfect example of the respect of subsidiarity, having a EU-level solution.
Yeah. So that works. I let Frank and Maxime comment as well, and then I'm happy to take your question on board too. Frank.
Just a short comment, because we probably don't have time, but at European level and let's say the questions, how do we support the transition, how do we support workers, households in the transition, which I said before is a policy-led transition. So it's understood that the policy level, European plus national levels have also a certain responsibility to support this. There are several tools in place, financial tools like the funds mentioned before, the cohesion funds, but also a just transition fund for regions phasing out coal, or now a new social climate fund to address emissions trading. But I want to add one other tool we have tried to put in place, which I hope responds to your concern, which is just a legally non-binding council recommendation on fair transition. And the idea is exactly that, to discuss with member states and commit member states, engage member states at their level, and it's regional levels, sector levels, with social partners, to put in place and support just transition, because it cannot be done alone from the European level, and nobody thinks that this can be done. This recommendation is out. It was negotiated by member states, agreed. It is.
Why do you think it's appropriate at the European level at the first place?
Because the member states have a common interest in getting this transition right, and coordination, as I said before, I think is key in managing this transition in a fair manner. If 27 member states each put in place different approaches to such policies, let's call them just transition policies, we believe it could be less forceful, be it only for exchange of best practices, to learn from each other. This recommendation.
But maybe you stifle competition, maybe you stifle experimentation. We need minimum conditions at the European level. There I agree.
This is allowed. What I tried to say is that this is a broad recommendation. It covers employment policies, skill policies, social protection, access to essential services at large, or large also funding. And we had a progress review with member states, where each member states and peer reviews discussed what the progresses have made, what are open issues. And I would like to mention it here because Spain came out, EBSCO ministers, labor and social affairs ministers, jointly adopted key messages from this, kind of lessons learned, where to go forward. They agreed that there's scope to have more targeted, more systematic, more coordinated approaches, but Spain was highlighted as the only country in the Union having a strategic approach to just transition. Now, there are many weaknesses also in Spain when it comes to reskilling and upskilling and others, but sort of measures like you mentioned, legislation on worker protection against heat stress, the Just Transition Institute and others were noted in this context. And I think it's just learning from each other. It's not to let's say, take responsibility at European level. No, on the contrary. To check what are the best practices, put in place at all levels and exchange, and then copy them or develop them further where needed. So,
for which the EU member states have actually given their approval, of course. Yeah,
they agreed it jointly.
Exactly, perfect. Maxime.
Yeah, thanks a lot. So first of all, I think subsidiarity is very important, and this is a fair point to bring in our debates. The point is that there is already a lot that can be done respecting subsidiarity, and this is relating to one particular DG of the Commission. It's called DG Reform. DG Reform is there to support the member states in doing the structural reforms that are going to improve the functioning of labor markets. It's only one aspect because it covers the whole spectrum of policy, but there is a specific unit dealing with labor market issues. And we are trying to develop that by having a stronger coordination as well with social partners. So far, the member states apply for the funding individually to this fund that is managed by DG Reform. And then the projects are national ones. And I think what you pointed out could be, they call it flagships. So when different countries in a similar issue want to learn from each other and invest resources because it comes with the investment with it. And one question mark, which is not clear on this commission coming in, what will happen of InvestEU? I think the difference with what happened in COVID is that it was a crisis that was external coming from outside. We had to, as a shock, adapt to it, and then sure was an effective response. I think what we are looking now is more competitiveness-friendly approach towards investment that is manageable in a context where public financing has taken a toll in the last years, and depending on the countries, of course, differently, but overall this is an issue. And so we need to be realistic on the public financing. We need to focus on the private investment. And in the private investment, the question is how to create these incentives I was speaking about. But there is potential for stronger coordination. And for that, DG Reform together with DG Employment can really support the process for member states to improve themselves.
Okay, thank you for that. And time will tell how this is going to play out indeed with the new European Commission. A final question from the audience. Yes.
Coming back to immigration, I want to point out a discussion we had earlier today regarding the talent pool, regarding what Ludovic said. It is not necessary. I mean, I see the point. There can be brain drain, but I don't think it's necessarily the case. If you engage in fair exchange and not sort of informal, illegal, partly illegal work, but if you engage in a fair exchange, let's say of care workers coming to Europe and helping out from countries which have a very different demographic situation. And Piotr Lewandowski showed that the demographic changes are Europe is the outlier. I mean, of course, we learn China is now becoming like Europe, maybe in that sense, but compared to the rest of the world, Europe is the outlier. And so there are gains possible for Europe and for the sending country. If you think about the issue that people going, Piotr was saying, doing a lottery, people going to Europe and work there, maybe just temporarily for a few years, could help finance the education system in the sending country and also improve the situation there. And that completely reverses the brain drain argument. It's an empirical question. It's also a question how it's politically implemented. But there are gains from that, I would say. On the other hand, I think migration policy, I mean, is only debated whether people should enter or not and come, and once they have a job, everything is fine. No. We have done very poorly in a number of European countries, not all of them, but Germany is one of them. Germany did not want to admit to be a migration country in the 60s and 70s and 80s. And in the 80s, it was tried to send the workers back who had come to Germany. And the second generation, the third generation has been very poorly integrated in the education system. I think, Christina, you have worked also on the citizenship that has easing access to citizenship has improved that a little bit. But we are really doing poorly, in particular in the German context, of integrating migrant children, migrant adolescents into the vet system. And given their share is growing relative to the non-migrant population, that's a big issue. Okay. So I think probably France has, from my understanding, France has big problems on that, and maybe I think also other European countries.
Thank you for those remarks. We unfortunately don't have the time anymore to go into those aspects in very much detail. We would like to wrap it up with a final question to you, also to have the audience something to think about when they go home and also when they attend the second day tomorrow. So if you would have to make a top 3 list of issues hampering a resilient European labour market, what are these 3 items? Ideally, you'll also mention only 3 words, but let's see how far we get. Frank, may I start with you?
Put me into a difficult situation here, yes. So, 3 top priorities for resilient labor markets. I think first, integrating or mainstreaming social employment aspects in all policies. Yeah. Second, ensuring investments, so including social investments. I think there's support for the transition in the broad public, also understanding, but there's a need for planning certainty, investment certainty to the extent possible for enabling condition and investment is the key here, which was mentioned by several of the speakers. And I have to make a third point, as the audience is mainly made up of researchers, evidence base, improving the evidence base, which allows not only to do long-term social impact assessments, which are often a bit abstract to people, but all stakeholders ask us what's the actual impact on the ground, real-time data, and we're trying to set up some tools there, an observatory which was mentioned, happy to share something bilaterally afterwards. And we're also under Horizon Europe setting up a new partnership on social transformations and resilience, multi-annual co-funded research program which should address many of these issues. Perfect. And I think this is needed to improve.
Very good. That's also thumbs up regarding your third point. So I think there's a lot of resonance with the audience on that. Christina.
Well, I can actually resonate with that. So I think we need we need a stronger also exchange between research and policymakers and actors at the European level. And I think what actually would be useful, I think research needs to get faster. I think data intelligence and big data will help. But I think there also needs to be this constant and maybe also temporary exchange. So, I mean, at the EU level, it's often like, oh, let's start an institute or let's do something, and then the processes are kind of.
So we need exchange, exchange.
So
okay.
why not?
Fair enough.
Exchange. I think exchange is one, and I will just make a second one and leave the third one for a discussion. Embrace technological change.
Okay, AI. Perfect. Thank you so much. Maxime.
4 words, productivity, employment, incentives, and social dialogue.
I love it. 4 points, but you made up for the second point, the 2 points that you got, Christina. Okay, thank you. Janice.
Lifelong learning and recognition of skills and untap the potentials.
Thank you. Finally.
Well, human in control transitions, job security, and investments.
Thanks a lot. And I think we could have had another debate on each of the points you just made. But thank you so much for your participation, for sharing your valuable insights. So please give a big hand to our panel. And with that, we have come to the end of the first day of the ELMI conference. Good to know for you that we have a reception that we're hosting across the hall. So please help yourselves to a drink. For the people back home, thank you so much for having joined us digitally. And for everyone over here, enjoy the drinks. Have a safe trip back home and hope to see you soon. Thank you.